Garrett Bradley, director of Time. This film follows Fox Rich, who devoted 2 decades of her life to freeing her incarcerated husband. And this was originally conceived as a companion short film to your short Alone, but things changed when you were wrapping. So can you talk about how that evolved in the future?
Sure, yeah. I was convinced I was making another 13-minute short film. And really, like, for me, the intention behind that was to, as a filmmaker, think about how I could continue to extend the conversation around incarceration from the sort of family's point of view, and to sort of develop a body of work that was in conversation with the facts, right? To develop a body of work that showed the effects of the facts. And so I met Fox Rich in the process of making Alone. She's briefly in Alone. And, we developed a relationship with each other, and, a sort of foundation of trust, which I think is essential to making any film, whether it's a documentary or not. And we embarked on this journey to make a film together. And yeah, as you said, it wasn't until our last day of shooting this short that she handed me what ended up being about 100 hours of her home personal archive, which really forced myself and Gabe Rhodes, who cut the film, to kind of radically rethink what we were making, how it was going to exist, in addition to it obviously being longer.
What did she tell you when she gave you the tapes?
It was pretty casual. I mean, she was on the phone. I think I remember it being nighttime and we were wrapping up, and I just was thanking her and saying, I'll be back in a few months and to show you what I have. And I remember she was on the phone with Robert, actually, and she said, hold on a second, I want to give you something, and handed me this little black bag that had just tons of mini DV tape in it. And she just said, maybe this will be useful to you. It was pretty casual for what it ended up being. And it was also terrifying for me. I think, there's no backups, and you've got it in your little car driving around, and someone's entire family history, their life,
Mm-hmm. So once you decide to turn into a feature, what's the next step? Because you already had footage you shot, right, from it being a short. So what's next step when you turn it into a feature with those tapes?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is my first feature-length documentary. So, I mean, I was embarking on. I'm continuously learning on this project every step of the way, even now. And I'd also never worked with an editor before. I'd always cut everything myself, just kind of out of necessity, not because I consider myself an editor in any kind of way. And so, it was a question, I think, for Gabe and I, of really going back to the intention of why we wanted to make the film. And I think even though the structure of it and the size of it, the scale of it changed, the intention, it was really important that the intention for me did not change, that remained the same, because the intention is sort of like a verbal contract between myself and those that I'm working with, which is why we're making the film and why they are agreeing to make the film with me. And for me, that intention was, connected to their message of that this is a story of 2.3 million American families, and we feel that this story can offer hope. And so I didn't want that to change. And I think really, from a more kind of practical way of answering your question, it boiled down to going through the archive and really making sure that every single frame, every single inch of the film was an illustration of that intention, was an illustration of what hope looked like for their family in their daily ritual and routine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because it's a very specific story, but also universal. And I think, like you said, like it kind of puts a face to those 2.3 million incarcerated. And well, it's also in black and white, and her footage is in black and white. It's very artful, impressionistic. Did you always intend for it to be in black and white?
Yeah, and actually her footage was all in color. It was really? Really beautiful archival color. And so I did for a moment there play with the film being in color, but the original reason for it being in black and white was that I wanted to maintain these a sort of formal connection between Time and Alone. I really think of them as sister films and as extensions of themselves, and I hope that they always exist together, you know, even now, even with one being longer than the other. So a lot of the formal decisions for me, just going into it from the beginning, I knew were going to be extrapolated from that first film. The experimentation process, though, was really telling. And for me, because structurally within the edit, we are both moving forward and backwards at the same time, I needed something, I kind of came full circle with needing there to be almost like saran wrap over the film that really created a level of linearity that isn't totally there actually within the structure of the film. And a lot of that was also connected to the music and wanting to use Emma Hoy's music. And oddly enough, the music with the color spectrum ended up being, it brought the work to a level that was too much, for lack of a better phrase. It was like hopping from one stone to the next instead of just being in a river, you know?
Mm-hmm. I feel like the black and white also gives it this timeless quality, no pun intended, and it also makes it feel like a memory, like it's very nostalgic. Mm-hmm. So was that what you were going for?
Yeah, I mean, I think memories are that's something that we talked a lot about in the process of making the film, because I mean, some of the beauty of what we do as filmmakers is like we are memory makers, you know. Films are not physical objects. The closest moment that we get to touching a film is really in the actual construction of it, you know, and even then it's still pretty hard to capture, you know. It really exists sort of in our minds and in our hearts, and I think I wanted to find a way to try to evoke the way in which life really is, which is that we have memories and that those memories inform our present moment and the decisions that we make, and how we feel about something and how we're processing something. So when Fox is taking pictures of her son at his white coat ceremony, for instance, that moment of him being a 5-year-old boy and saying he's going to carry, you know, her grocery bags for her. As a mother, all those moments are conflated. They're not separated in any kind of chronology or idea of linearity. They're all in the same moment. And so I wanted the film to mimic that and to feel in the same way that real life feels, you know?
Mm-hmm. I like how you focus on Fox and her love for her husband and her family and her determination to free him, and not so much on the crime that got him sentenced. So how did you land on that approach?
Yeah, I mean, I think as a filmmaker, I'm making films to be in conversation with other films. I'm not making film. I don't think any of us have any grandiose idea. I'd hope not any grandiose ideas of making things that live in a vacuum. And so I think that that's sort of, for me, that's a liberating mind frame to be in, because it means that I can tell a film the best way that I know how to as a director, knowing that it can be in conversation with other things. And so, you know, as I mentioned earlier, as a filmmaker, I'm making a decision to focus on the effects of the facts, right? The facts themselves are there. They exist. They're out there. And this film stands on the shoulders of a film like 13th, right? And so I think that if someone wants to understand the system, they can watch 13th. And then if they want to understand, well, what does that really mean for the human experience in the most kind of intimate and personal way, they can watch Time. And I love that we as filmmakers, we are a community. We are making films that are in dialogue and in response to one another, you know?
One scene I loved is Fox, as she does numerous times in the film, she's calling the judge's office and she's put on hold, and then she gets through, but she gets nothing from them. And then she hangs up and goes on this mini rant. And she like takes a sigh and then like goes back to work. It was like such a microcosm of what she's been going through for 20 years. Can you talk about having that scene and letting it play out?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was a human moment. You know, it's just, I think that we as Black people in America, you know, performance is a part of daily life to a certain extent. It's a form of both resistance and oppression. You know, they are twofold. And I think that Fox throughout the film is taking on a type of performance and having to maneuver through the bureaucracy of the system. But that doesn't mean that those moments that we see in that film don't exist. You know, that's part of what makes her a human being. I think what's more interesting about that scene is when we think about it in sort of cinematic space, if one could imagine that in the beginning of the film, I'm not sure people would understand or feel that it was justified, you know? And so my hope is that by the time we see that moment, we are angry with her and we understand why the armor and the performance is so necessary, and what it means to try to take a breath and what that looks like and how necessary it is.
Mm-hmm. And I understand you're showing the film in prisons as well, right?
Yeah, it's been difficult with COVID, actually, but that's a huge part of something that we're working on collectively with Fox and Rob as well, is trying to reach people who are in prisons.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
What's been the reaction from what you've been able to do so far?
I mean, the reaction that we've gotten from just the community in general has been really incredible. I think that it's validating to hear from so many family members and loved ones who have parents and brothers and sisters and husbands and wives that are incarcerated. Because a lot of the time, you know, I think part of the big sort of problem is that the prison industrial complex is one that has been made invisible by design. And so in many cases, the only evidence of what's happening, the only evidence of 2.3 million people being incarcerated is in the family, is in those that are serving time on the outside. So being able to hear from people that they feel seen and validated, and that it's coming from a place of love, from a place that they can relate to as individuals, is a really good feeling.
Awesome. Well, Garrett, it's great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your time.
Thank you, Joyce.
Thank you.